Hello and welcome to the Magnetize Love Show. My name is Barbara Santon, and today we have with us the amazing Katherine Woodward Thomas. Welcome. So Katherine Woodward Thomas is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, and the national bestseller, Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Welcome, Katherine. It is such an honor.
Thank you so much.
So the topic of magnetizing love, calling in the one, it's kind of a similar energy, right? Can you speak to just that drawing in or that magnetizing or that calling in?
I've always thought of the law of attraction as kind of the feminine principle of creativity, of how we create things. We're all kind of living in a somewhat masculine dominant culture. So, whether you're female or male, it's a gender neutral term. It's just the masculine is more like, let me go out and make something happen. Calling in the one is about making love welcomed, about being a place of love, about clearing away the inner obstacles to love, getting very clear about what your vision is, the future you're committed to creating, and starting to allow yourself to develop in the direction of your dreams, to become the one that you want to call in. So it's creating from the inside out, which is really the best way to create love, because if you want to build a building, it's really good to have a plan and to know exactly how many bricks you're going to need, and exactly who's going to be on your team to put in the pipes and put in the electricity. But you can't really create true love from a strategic plan. There's an element of mystery to it, and there's an element of magic to it. So calling in the one is about being able to lay out the roadmap of how we get out of our own way, how we graduate from old painful patterns, how we begin to manifest a love that has eluded us up until now, and even maybe eluded anyone in your family. Some of us come from pretty disturbed circumstances, particularly those of us who have a hard time magnetizing love. It's not easy for us. And when we do tend to have relationships, we tend to repeat old painful patterns. We get involved with yet another narcissist, or yet another unavailable person, or yet another addict, who's drinking every night or something. And so we get sometimes discouraged, and then we'll spend years alone because we don't want to be in that codependent place where we become less in our power or less in our creativity or productivity in life. So for some of us, we've been kind of living in either or life. Either I have my mother's marriage or I have not my mother's marriage, and so to actually even step out of any of those roles and say, well, what's the relationship I really crave? What does the relationship my soul yearns for in order to take me to the next level? So it's not even option A or option B. It's option C. We're going to completely create it from our imagination. What I have found, Barbara, is a lot of us are doing our relationship work by going back into the past and really working on those old relational traumas and understanding them. And I think that's a really critical thing to do. And yet, transformation is different than healing. So we're doing a lot of healing work to go back into the past and put some of those old traumas to bed to the best of our ability, so that they're not so unconsciously just right there on the surface. But to actually transform your life and to create that which might occur for us as a miracle, because it's so out of left field. It's so unlike anything we've ever had before. You actually have to start with the future. What's the future that you're committed to? And then become really diligent in your curiosity about, and who am I in that future? What's the possible self that I am? in that future? And how do I begin to embody that self, to grow into that self, to start to show up as that self? And that's what actually begins to shift things in a way that we would call pretty magical.
Wow. That is amazing. And that is absolutely in alignment with what I believe. And of course, I mean, you're brilliant. I would like to ask you then, because I know this is the question of a lot of our audience, is fine. That sounds all great and everything, but how do I not do? How do I not go? How do I not plan? How do I, envision this thing it's like almost unrealistic. Like, really? Like, I'm allowed to be ridiculous in my dream and that will then manifest?
So here's the thing. When most people come to Calling in the One, they come with a lot of resignation. And the resignation is because they've had a lot of evidence that it's not possible for them.
Right.
And they have a lot of evidence for the old identity that they crafted in response to relational traumas when they were young, like I'm not good enough, or I'm really alone and no one will ever really show up for me, or I'm the one who's invisible. My feelings and needs don't matter to other people. So we have these conclusions that we came to at the level of identity when we were far too young to even have language. Some of these conclusions are just like a felt sense in the body that we landed on when we were babies in the crib or even forming fetuses in the womb. So they're even outside of language. And identity actually drives creation. And so what we look at, and I mean, the simple answer to your question is that when you begin to understand how you are creating, recreating, and recreating, how you yourself are the source of the pattern, what opens up is the choice to do it differently. It actually opens up possibility. Because most of us kind of just feel intuitively victimized by what happened to us and the missing development from our childhoods. We feel kind of saddled with that and in reaction to that. And we're busy compensating for that. So if I'm not good enough, then I'm just going to be excellent at being everything that somebody wants me to be so that I can be more, prove my value, right? So we get really good at that. Or if we have an alone story, then we get really good at being self-sufficient. So most of us are really in the compensation of that. What we're doing in Calling in the One is we're revealing the self that got born in the trauma. Mm-hmm. The sense of self as I am unworthy, for example, or I am not safe. And we're identifying even how old that part of you is. And we're distinguishing the difference in a way that's very visceral, like you can really get it. It's not just cerebral, like you feel it in your gut. The difference between the traumatized self and the true self. Mm-hmm. Is it really true that you're not worthy of love? Well, there's a part of you that knows you are, which is why you're so frustrated.
Right.
That it's not showing up.
Right.
Right. It's a wounded self that doesn't feel traumatized. It's not your true self. Your true self knows. Your true self knows that you weren't born to be alone in this lifetime. Your true self knows that you're missing some skills on how to keep yourself safe. That if you had them, and they weren't just walls, but like genuine healthy skills, like discernment, like negotiation of your needs, like the ability to know what your needs are and prioritize your needs, like healthy expectations that others would be concerned and care about your needs once you express them. All these things are what we call missing development. But your healthy self knows that that number one, you're a lifelong learner, that you have the capacity to learn what you didn't know back then. And that if you had those skills, that you do indeed have the capacity to learn how to keep yourself safe in relationship, and that's what's been missing. And if you learned how to do that better, that you too could have happy, healthy love. So there's a part of us that does know the truth already. And unfortunately, that younger traumatized self when it comes to love is often the one in the driver's seat. It's like the 3-year-old driving the car. So in calling in the one, we help get your wise, adult, developed, competent, caring, compassionate adult self in the driver's seat of your love life. And we safely tuck that little younger you who's been wounded back in the back seat, secure in the safety seat, back there, where you have access to take good care of that younger you. But they're no longer driving your love life. So because it's the ability to see how you've been showing up in the old story in specific ways. So, for example, in the I'm alone, very often in the compensation of becoming very self-sufficient, the experience that other people have is that they can't really find their way into your world. It's like you don't need anything from them.
Right.
So the development is to see, I need to take on a practice of being more vulnerable and letting people know what I need. And then being open to receiving it, which feels scary to someone who has a belief that other people don't really show up for me. Or it might be about starting to raise your expectations that other people should show up for you. Anyone who you let onto your inner circle, part of the criteria is that that person's available to show up. They have demonstrated that they are someone to count on, not like they're perfect at it, because the nature of relationships is, misattunements and mistakes and then repair. But the repair part is possible. And the growth part is possible. So that's what we're working on Calling in the One, is becoming the self of that future. Really interested. And that is developmental. So the need to heal from our past wounds is still present. And we might always be healing from some of the things that happened to us back then.
Yeah.
There's a lot of grief if you lose a parent or someone betrayed you. There's sadness to that. It can come up every birthday or every holiday, every Mother's Day, every Father's Day. For the rest of your life, you might need to do a healing process. But to understand that you will tend to, in the face of a disappointment, go back into the old story, and then to be able to work with yourself and wake yourself up and mentor that younger part of yourself, so that part of you is not necessarily driving the dynamics between yourself and others. Right. So you can hear it's quite deep what we're doing in just 7 weeks. And when Calling in the One came out in 2004, I had probably worked with a couple hundred people. I've worked with thousands of people now. I've had that great joy and honor. So I keep refining the process. I have rewritten the book. It's coming out in May of 2021.
I can't wait. My book is old and tattered and has earmarks and everything.
And I mean, the world is changing. So when your book came out, I was talking about manifesting this miracle and how I created my relationship with my first husband, Mark, who's now I affectionately refer to as my husband, because I am the creator of Conscious Uncoupling, which came out of my uncoupling after a decade of marriage with Mark, which was very kind and conscious and uncommonly decent. And we're still good friends and co-parents to our daughter. And I'm now repartnered with Michael. And but to be able to back then when I wrote the book, we didn't even have pictures on the internet. So I tell a story about meeting Mark in this miraculous way that I didn't even think to say, and I couldn't see his picture. because in the internet dating world, they didn't have the
Right.
technology back then.
Right.
So much has changed. So I needed to update the
Yeah,
book and make
yeah.
it clearer, and also just really be more inclusive of the variations on the theme that we're kind of expanding into on what it looks like to have love in the 21st century. So I'm really proud of the new book, but the process is the same.
Okay.
So
Still
anyone can,
7 weeks.
yes, the process I didn't touch because the process works when you work it.
It's true. That's how I called in my current partner.
Oh,
Yeah, I did it in a workshop, um, for like led by me. I wanted to do it, so I invited girlfriends to do it with me.
good
So,
for
and I was
you.
already a dating and relationship coach at the time, so I wanted to integrate it and try it. And it is definitely it's magical. So it's amazing work that you've done. So again, then I that's why I recommend it to all of my clients at this moment, because it is such a great process. So the last bit you shared about calling in the one, your husband, and then uncoupling from him. Can you speak a little bit? I mean, we're talking about magnetizing love, but there is a bit of an elephant in the room, and that is we don't always all stay with all of the partners that we've had, obviously. Otherwise, right? Like there's breakups, there's reasons we aren't with somebody. There's 10-year couplings, there's 10-month couplings. Can you just speak a little bit to happy, healthy love that doesn't last forever necessarily?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Barbara. I think it's important to recognize that whenever I talk about this initially for people who are still in the creation stage, there tends to be a like, oh no, don't tell me that. I want lifelong love. I want the happy ever after. So I always like to start by saying, look, whatever you're standing for, whatever future you're standing for, if that matters most to you, we will stand with that, with you, to create a lifelong partnership.
Mhm.
That said, I think it's important to recognize that the happily ever after story to which we all kind of collectively aspire as the goal of love was created when the lifespan was less than 40 years of age, and at a time when there was no mobility. There were very, very few options in life. And as a matter of fact, oddly enough, it was created in Venice, Italy, which is still the romance capital of the world. Isn't that
Wow.
crazy?
Yes.
But it was created in Venice, Italy, and it was post-Renaissance times. Most people could read, but they were also very, very poor. And
Mm.
if you were born into poverty, you were absolutely, unquestionably going to live your whole life in poverty and die in poverty. There was no way out of poverty. And if you notice, and as a matter of fact, there was even a law in the books at the time that if you were a noble person, you could not marry a commoner.
Right.
That's how locked in the class structure was. And if you notice, all of the happily ever after myths are wish fulfillment across the board, upward mobility included. And moving from being a commoner, a have not, to being a have, and then you bring everyone you love with you, and they all live happily ever after. At the time, over half the children, 60% of the children died before their 16th birthday. So
Wow.
you have to get the suffering that was happening in Venice, Italy, when the happily ever after story was born. And because people were in such heart pain constantly and struggle, it was like wildfire. It just spread like wildfire. And then it got picked up by the French and the English, and they started to revise it. And so here we are today with romantic love being a relatively new aspiration of marriage.
Mm.
Before 200 years ago, marriage was about property and ownership. It was about clans joining together. It was not about love. As a matter of fact, love was supposed to not be included in marriage because love was thought to destabilize marriage. So I like to give just the cultural context of
Yes.
where we are so we have a way of making sense of it. The truth about love for us, and I'm pro marriage. I'm really pro marriage. It's very important people understand that. I'm not advocating breakups, But the truth about love is serial monogamy. Statistically, most of us are slated to have 2 or 3 significant relationships in our lifetime. And so that means that we will also have 1 or 2 significant breakups and endings. But inside the happily ever after myth, we've never learned how to do this well. So conscious uncoupling is my offering that helps us to get through that really rocky time, because what's happening in the brain and in our biology is we are not born for breakups. Our brains go a little crazy when we are rejected. It triggers the same place in the brain as if someone were physically hurting us. We go into fight or flight, we go into war mode, and we do a lot of damage to ourselves, to each other, and to our children if we have children. So it's an offering that is meant to spare us from this suffering, because I am a firm believer that our next relationship will not begin when we meet our next partner, but with how we end with our last partner.
Wow. That is profound.
And profound because it's accurate and we all kind of know it's true. We don't want to be bringing all of those battles into the next relationship. We don't want to get stuck in blame and resentment. I've met people who 10 years, 20 years after a bad breakup have not even been out on one date. Breakups are a crossroads. And unless we navigate them well and in a way that leaves our heart open and even more capable of loving on the other side of the loss of love, we are in danger of living lesser lives in the aftermath of that heartbreak. And
so for most of the audience, sorry to interrupt you, for most of the audience here that's watching this, they're single women. And for sure, many of these have just come out of a breakup in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, right? What would you say to them who are not able to do a conscious uncoupling with their ex-partner, but rather are kind of now in this stage of like,
I'd say do the conscious uncoupling. 95% of people who do conscious uncoupling are single.
okay,
They
great.
don't do it with their partner. It's one of the shadow sides of Gwyneth and Chris popping conscious uncoupling into the lexicon, is they look like this very, effortless thing that they did together. I wrote the book for those whose hearts have been shattered, who want nothing to do with ever talking to that person again, or, someone who has been ill-treated and is just bereft, but now has to co-parent with that person.
Right.
But it's for those who are brokenhearted, actually, and those who, and it's the pathway through having been betrayed and deeply disappointed in love in a way that allows you to really complete that in a very liberating way, where you are no longer captive by a broken heart or by the betrayal that you suffered, but you're actually wiser and more skillful and grateful even for the lessons that you've learned and that you can now take to heart moving forward and apply in your next relationship.
Well, everyone watching needs to run out and get that book. I actually have read it. I don't remember much of it, but I think it did get me through that breakup, because that's how that was my what do they call it? Entry, when there's a funny saying when you take a drug and it leads to other ones. Well, that book, what led me to calling it the one, is what I'm
Oh, great. And how wonderful. You must have done a good job if you don't even really think of that anymore.
I don't fully remember it because it was longer ago, and I've read Calling
Yeah.
one more time since. So everyone should go out and get both of those books and wait for the new Calling in the One in May. And we are way over time. I was worried this might happen, but thank you so much for being so generous with your wisdom. Can you share with us what your gift is going to be for our audience?
Well, there's two gifts. I'm going to give people a choice. If you go to callingintheone.com, you can have access to the Calling in the One free starter kit, and where I have a 50-minute talk that's taking you through some of the steps of calling in the one. And I also have the Love Out Loud Daily on KatherineWoodwardThomas.com. And the Love Out Loud Daily is, actually, I don't call it daily anymore because I only do it 3 times a week. But Love Out Loud messages where it's nuggets, it's golden nuggets about how to improve our relationships, make our relationships loving, safe, happy, healthy, and free. So those are just free teachings that I give out. They're just 300 words. So they're practices that you can take into your life and apply.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your generosity, and thank you for your time today. And it was so wonderful to be here with you. Thank you to the audience for joining. And there are going to be many, many more of these amazing interviews. So stay tuned and check your inbox. Bye for now.